The hot air balloon scene was wild. Luke Newton was living his best life that day as like the hunk with the rope. He was loving it. It was great. Hi, I'm Nicola Coughlan, and this is how I became Penelope Featherington in Bridgerton. I auditioned for Bridgerton when I had finished season 2 of Derry Girls. I originally auditioned for Penelope, but I didn't realize that she was Lady Whistledown. Sorry, spoiler if anyone who hasn't seen it. And I didn't have a lot of time to prep. I had like 2 days, so I just learned my lines, went and did it, but it was with a casting director's assistant. And I was like, okay, but this must be the step before the main step. But what I didn't expect was about 2 weeks later getting a call offering me the job. What is wild to me about Bridgerton is that I never did a single chemistry test. The relationships I have in the show, the ones with Claudia Jessie, who plays Eloise, and Luke Newton, who plays Colin, they're really, really important in the show. A lot of it was to do with Shonda. She cast a lot of the actors from a single audition. Everyone says she just has an instinct and she feels like whoever's right for the part is who she says, and her track record's pretty amazing. In the beginning of season 1 of Bridgerton, we had a historical advisor called Hannah Grieg, who was an expert in the Regency era. We all know we're not like aiming for historical accuracy. Bridgerton is its own thing. She showed us a lot of pictures. I remember one that really stood out to me. It was of 3 young ladies lounging on a couch. And aside from the dress and, you know, the really like gilded interior, it just looked like any 3 girls chilling out on a couch. And that, I went, okay, they're not statues. People at home chilled and they laid back on couches and they put their feet up. I wanted to have that differentiation between her at home chilling out, being herself, not having all the eyes on her, and then when the queen is in the room, you've got to hold yourself differently. But with Penelope, I think I was really lucky because I always love having as much source material as possible. We have Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series, the books in which the show is based on. So I reread those a lot. I read the 4th book, which is Colin and Penelope's book, to get as much of an insight on her as possible. But it was interesting because she's a lot older in that book. So I had to take like, you know, anecdotal things of how she was like when she was young. A lot of it felt like my preparation was in the physicality of her. I always thought of her like a yo-yo in season 1, that she'd kind of go out to say something, but then she had to pull it back. She'd try and be crafty and try and do this, but it was like, I've got to bring it in. And then in season 2, I wanted her to have a little bit more of an arrogance about her, but misplaced maybe a little bit, because she's like the most famous person in London, but nobody knows that she is. And she sort of then convinced herself that her and Colin are having this love story, which they're really not in season 2. But in season 3, I wanted her to feel more grounded, more like a young woman, and more becoming comfortable with herself. I always think a lot of the mistakes actors make is when you have a big age gap between you and the character you're playing, is to try and sort of patronize and not see young people as still fully rounded human beings, which they are. And they try and play it like a silly little baby. And I'm like how many 17-year-olds you know are actually like that? They're completely with it. So I just was like, she's a younger girl, but I'm still playing her as a human, a fully rounded human. So I think it was about innocence of her, but also not undermining her intelligence. So when it comes to like Claire from Derry Girls versus Penelope, I sometimes think of characters in terms of energy. Like Claire is like up here, it's like frantic, frenetic energy, and it's, you know, the speech is very like rat-a-tat-tat with her, and it's this sort of internal pace that's just go, 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 go.
All these old women were taking their tights off and handing them to the driver.
Whereas I feel like Penelope is far more grounded, and she's a real observer and takes things in.
You can always tell when a suitor is serious about courtship just by how he looks when a young lady dances with another.
They're both quite bookish, they're smart, but Claire cannot keep anything in and Penelope keeps everything in. I absolutely adore the dance lessons. It's something that's been so central to the show since season 1, and Jack Murphy has been our choreographer throughout that time, and he's the most wonderful man. Season 1, the first dance I got to do with Colin is called The Siege of Ennis, which is really strangely a very famous Irish dance that I've known since I was a little girl. We were the contrast to the Duke and Daphne, who had this very romantic sweeping dance. We had this sort of giddy, young, childish dance. And then, you know, I had another dance with Luke at the end of season 2, and that was sort of inspired a little bit by tango and a little bit back and forth. They're kind of turning and they're not really seeing one another, and that is really reflective of what's going on in their relationship at the time. And then in season 3, we have several dances together, I'm really happy to say. It's just showing where the dynamic has changed and the shift that comes with them, and her standing on her own 2 feet a little more, and also getting to dance with Lord Debling. And that dance, when she sees that a man finally sees her as a romantic prospect and as a woman, and I feel like in that moment it does something to her, and the whole town sees it and Colin sees it. And so storytelling through dance is a super important part of the show. It was more Penelope's tone of voice that I worked on, the higher tones and the young energy and not a lot of resonance.
He's already making his way back to you here, to
come and take you home.
And then through season 2, I dropped her a little bit.
So your lady whistle down, sir.
It's over.
In season 3, I dropped her more because she has to feel like a woman, and like there's a certain amount of grounding to her.
You do not much like attracting notice, do you?
The days on set they're hardcore. My pickup time's generally about 4 a.m. But I will get up like the very last minute. I'll shower the night before. I have my bag ready by the door, my water, my script, everything. I like to keep my scripts in these like spring binders so they hold them together, and I'll keep 2 episodes at a time so I'll know which script we're doing that day, because we'll film generally like episodes 1 and 2 together and 3 and 4 together and so on. It takes about an hour to get to set. I get there. We start hair and makeup, getting the wig on, doing face masks, doing everything. So I have about 2 and a bit hours in there where I'll read over my script. We'd take Polaroids of every single look to document them. Then you go down to set, you do your director's rehearsal and the crew rehearsal. We shoot not that much in a day, really. If you like watch the show, it's probably like 2 scenes, I guess, a day. Like, it takes a long time to film. And then we wrap up about, 6 p.m. And then you go, you de-rig out of hair and makeup, you get your wig off, you look like a little drowned rat, take your makeup off, and you're like, oh my gosh, I look like a Regency era fancy lady a minute ago, and now I look like this. Then I get in the car, I move my tabs, I say film this day, look at my scripts for the next day. It can be an hour to 2 hours to get back home because of London traffic. Get in the door about 8:30, fall asleep, and do it all again the next day for 8 months. The hot air balloon scene was wild because initially it was scripted not as intensely as it was. It was sort of like it came in Penelope's direction and Lord Debling like whisked her away. But then they were like, no, we're gonna make this a full stunt. I was like, you are kidding me. And we had to like head off and do full stunt rehearsals for it. I had to like throw myself onto a crash mat. Sam Phillips had to come and he fully rugby tackled me. Like at one point, he went in so hardcore that his coat stuck to my wig and we were attached to one another. Yeah, Luke Newton was living his best life that day as like the hunk with the rope. I really adored this season that they wrote some funny parts for Pen, because I feel like she's been such a sad character in a lot of ways that hasn't had a lot of joy, and to play her as like this goof and realize how terrible she is with men and how she has these insecurities, but they manifest in very funny ways.
I love birds as well.
I adored that. So in some of those moments, I could be slightly more off the book and like take my time with stuff in a way, and I loved doing that. Something I realized I do as Penelope, it's unintentional, is like blink a lot. I'm like, do these like triple blinks, and I'm like, where did that come from? I think I don't have a cute crying face. You know, like Florence Pugh's this really cute like downturn like smile. My whole jaw just goes like, and it's just like everything. Yeah, I wish I was a cute crier, but I've realized through seeing all the shows in which I cry, I'm like, I'm absolutely not one at all. When we were filming the carriage scene, I remember reading that scene in the books, and it's super steamy in the books. So we knew that it was a big deal because the show is so much about those intimate moments. It's a real part of the story. Sometimes you see shows and you're like, well, why is this in there? With Bridgerton, it never feels like that because it's about female pleasure and intimacy and romantic connection at a deep level. Immediately it was like, that's terrifying. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know that I feel ready. So I had a long time to mentally and physically prepare for it. I am very, very lucky that I've known Luke for like 4, almost like 5 years now. We could talk about it with one another, and that makes a huge difference, because I think if I was going into it with someone I didn't have a good dialogue with, I'd feel even more intimidated than I already did. What was beautiful actually is that we had an incredible intimacy coordinator called Lizzie Talbot who's worked on seasons 1 and 2, but we had a lot of say in what we wanted to do. We felt a lot of ownership over it, and sometimes people misunderstand an intimacy coordinator and they say, is it like a dance routine in which like your hand goes here and you kiss at this point? It's not really like that. We got to do it in a really organic way, but in that scene, a lot of it was just Luke and I in the carriage with no one else in there. So it was nice because it felt intimate in a very safe way. It was quite funny actually. I do have one funny story about when we were shooting it. Our director, Andrew Ahn, who I adore, was like, it's gonna go up to this point and then you're gonna hear me shout stop, and you then got to Bridgerton House. And I was like, okay, amazing, that's fine. So we were doing the whole scene and it's quite long. There's dialogue and then there's the intimate stuff. And we were going and going and doing the kissing and whatever. And I was like, this feels long, like this feels like it's going on a long time, and I couldn't hear anything. So we just sort of kept doing it, and I was like, this is going on for ages, like I don't understand. And then I just sort of like took it to myself. I was like, oh, the carriage just stopped. I was like in character, but I was like, okay, they called cut, and he came over and he was like, what were you doing? We went, what? He's like, why didn't you stop? And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, I was shouting, cut, cut. But the carriage was like a little sound booth, so we had not heard it. I'm sure everyone was like, what are they doing? So wardrobe is an enormous part of Bridgerton, and an enormous part of getting into character, because you feel so physically transformed when you put those gowns on. This season, like, you start off, they've really brought her back to like this super garish colors, and I was very, very up for that, because I was like, you really want to see that transformation in her. So I feel like then the color palette, she goes into this emerald for her reveal, but I feel like then she goes, that makes me stand up too much, I'm going to pull back and go into soft blues. And then she sort of really starts, the physical transformation and the mental transformation really then start to blend together over time. The thought of doing this season scared me constantly throughout season 2, in the lead up to season 3. And then I finished and I was like, I did it. You know, human beings were a lot more similar than we are different. You know, in season 1, when she was the shy girl in the corner watching the boy she liked dance with someone else, I remember that as a teenager. You know, I remember like dealing with sudden fame with Bridgerton, like she was dealing with Lady Whistledown. The process of loving yourself, like that's still an everyday task. I'm not going to say I finished filming season 3, I was like, I've figured it out now, but the importance of that and the importance of valuing yourself, nothing is ever going to make sense until you can give yourself that. So yeah, she's teaching me things all the time.